So you're trying to get an ITIN for a dependent? It seems like it should be simple enough, right? But there's this one little detail about proving US residency that trips up thousands of people every single year. If you've ever been baffled by this, believe me, you are not alone. Today, we're going to break down that exact rule so you can get it right the first time.
Here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll bust the biggest myth out there, the passport. Then we'll get into why the IRS is so demanding about this extra proof. I'll give you the official checklist of documents they'll actually accept, we'll navigate some really tricky exceptions, and then we'll look at the serious risks of what happens if you get this wrong.
All right, let's just dive right into the biggest point of confusion. We all think a valid passport is the ultimate ID, and for most things it is. But for this specific IRS process, relying only on a passport is probably the #1 reason these applications get thrown out.
I want you to picture this. You've followed all the steps, you've filled out the Form W-7, you've mailed in your child's original valid passport, you feel like you've checked all the boxes. And then, weeks later, you get that dreaded rejection notice. You're just left scratching your head wondering why. And here is the absolute key to understanding this whole thing. A passport is great at proving two things: who you are, your identity, and your foreign status. But what it does not automatically prove is that you live in the United States. And when tax credits are on the line, the IRS needs you to prove both. They are two separate requirements in their eyes.
And just so we're all on the same page, let's do a quick refresher. An ITIN is just a 9-digit number the IRS issues. It has nothing to do with immigration or work authorization. It is purely a tool they use to process federal tax returns for folks who can't get a social security number.
So why this extra hoop to jump through? Is this just the IRS being difficult for the sake of it? Well, actually, no. There's a very specific reason rooted in tax law that triggers this whole extra layer of scrutiny.
Okay, here's how the IRS sees it. For absolutely every ITIN applicant, you've got to prove your identity and your foreign status. A passport usually takes care of that, no problem. But for a very specific group, that is, dependents you're claiming for certain tax benefits, the IRS adds a whole second requirement. You must also prove they physically live in the US.
And here it is, the main trigger. The #1 reason this rule kicks in is because of the $500 credit for other dependents, or ODC. See, a non-negotiable requirement for that credit is that the dependent has to be a US resident. So the IRS isn't asking for documents just for fun, they're literally asking you to prove you're eligible for the credit you're trying to claim. So this brings us to the very first thing the IRS is going to look at, the passport itself. If they open it up and see a clear, legible US date of entry stamp, you might be okay. But if that stamp is missing or it's unreadable, that is an immediate red flag for them. And that's when they'll require you to send in one of the other documents from their approved list to prove residency.
Okay, so what if the passport doesn't have that magic stamp? What do you do then? Well, the IRS has a very specific list of documents they'll accept, and, this is important, the required document changes based on how old your dependent is.
For the little ones, kids under 6, your options are pretty limited. You'll need an original or a certified copy of a US medical record, a US school record, a state ID, or a US visa. Notice the pattern here? Every single one of these documents places that child physically within the United States. Now for kids and teens from 6 to 17, the list looks pretty similar. A US school record is often the go-to, a state ID or driver's license works too, and so does a US visa. But notice what's missing. The medical record is no longer an option for this age group. And for adult dependents, 18 and over, the list expands a little bit to include proof of address documents. So now things like a US bank statement, a rental lease, or even a utility bill with their name and a US address on it become acceptable options. Now, of course, because this is the tax code we're talking about, there are some really important and honestly kind of confusing exceptions to this rule. And you really need to understand these to avoid sending in paperwork you don't need to.
There are two big ones you have to know. First up, dependents of US military members stationed overseas are totally exempt from this rule. Easy enough. But second, and this is the one that gets people, is for dependents from Canada or Mexico. If you're just claiming them as a dependent, you do not need proof of US residency. But the second you try to claim that 500 ODC for them, the rule flips and you absolutely do need to prove they live in the US. That is such a critical distinction. So why are we spending all this time on one little detail? Because getting this wrong isn't just about getting a rejection letter in the mail. It can set off a whole chain reaction of problems that can drag on for months and months.
Let's just start with a number that's, well, it's pretty sobering.
In 2023 alone, the IRS ended up destroying almost 8,000 taxpayer documents. And we're talking about things like original passports, all because there was a problem with an application and they couldn't reach the person who sent it in. Your most critical documents are seriously at risk.
So here's the domino effect. First, your ITIN application is flat out rejected. At the very same time, the IRS goes ahead and processes your tax return, but they issue what's called a math error notice and just take away that $500 credit you claimed. And to top it all off, your original passport is now stuck in IRS limbo for months, which means you can't even start over and try to fix the problem.
And the scale of this problem is just massive. Since 2022, we're talking over 500,000 ITIN applications rejected. And just for the 2022 tax year, IRS math error notices wiped out over $6 million in those other dependent credits, often because of this exact issue. This is real money that taxpayers are losing over a documentation rule.
And you don't have to just take my word for it. The IRS's own internal watchdog, the Taxpayer Advocate Service, has put it bluntly. They said that navigating this process is difficult, and that when people submit their critical ID documents, they risk not receiving them back.
So it really all boils down to this one simple action. Before you seal that envelope, open up your dependent's passport. Look for that US entry date stamp. If you don't see it, you absolutely must include one of those other approved documents. That one quick check can literally be the difference between getting your credit and facing a nightmare of stress and delays.